You know, we appreciate that some of the things that we've done when we've talked about these panel sessions can be challenging, though, for some people listening to them. And I just want to say, you know, that actually if you find this difficult, if it's too difficult to listen to all of it, we understand if you need to take a few moments out. I firmly believe that the best place to be during the service is in the auditorium. But actually we know that maybe for whatever reason, that might not be where you are. If you need to take a few minutes break, you're welcome to step out and come back in. Obviously, if you're watching online, there are lots of other messages if it gets too tricky to watch. Because I know that this is going to be a challenging topic that we're going to talk about, perhaps an emotional topic in places. We think that's why it's important for us to talk about it as a church. But I just wanted to give you a heads up before we get into things as well. So, that said, Pastor Denise, Nikki, it's a pleasure to have you both with us today. We mentioned that this is a panel about disability, and do you want to just share with us a bit about why we've asked you to be on the panel today?
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Nikki Collins. I'm married to Carl. We've been married for 6 years, and between us we've got 5 children. We've got Elliot, who's the smiley face you see on the way into church every morning, who's 23. We've got Toby, who's 18. We've got Evie and Grace, who are both 13, and Joshua, who's 11. And our eldest Elliot and youngest Joshua have both got learning difficulties. They've both got a genetic deletion. And so Elliot's is so rare it hasn't got a name. He's just got genes missing off the short arm of his chromosome 10. That's his condition. And Joshua's is Williams syndrome. And again, it's the same kind of condition. And it's a really random condition. It's something that can happen to anyone. It happens at conception. When the sperm meets the egg in the womb, a little chunk of DNA goes missing from that first meeting. And so then as that embryo develops, that deletion is missing from every cell in the body of that person. And for Josh and Elliot, that's just presents itself as like global developmental delay. And with all these conditions, there's a wide range there. Elliot's he's got more severe learning difficulties than Joshua. But yeah, they both got developmental delay. They're both in special schooling, and they'll both need help throughout their adult life.
Thank you, Nikki. Pastor, please.
Yes, well, most of you know me, but you would also know that Tom and I, we have 2 beautiful children, Rebecca, our daughter, who is here this morning, our son Daniel, who is in Australia. But what a lot of you probably don't know is we do actually have we had a third child as well. He was our firstborn. And Joel was born, interestingly enough, with Williams syndrome, which is a very rare disorder, and it has its own complications. And as typical with all of these syndromes, you know, you have the mild to the extreme, and our Jolie was on the far extreme side.
Yeah. So, thank you both for sharing. Could you explain a bit about how you first felt, maybe you first, Denise, how you first felt when you heard this diagnosis and how that had an impact on your relationship with God?
Yes, I mean, like all of these things, they come as a real shock to the system. I can remember just feeling that real shock. And as you can imagine too, 37 years ago, they didn't have all the knowledge of what they even had today. Joel was born with enormous problems, heart conditions, vomiting, diarrhea, not that is a major problem on its own, but connected with where he was, he just had a lot of internal issues. And he was actually initially put under the cerebral palsy banner. And I can just remember, first of all, the shock being set in as to how did this happen? Yes, what do we do now? Where do we go? It's you know, trying to comprehend what doctors were saying. I know in many ways, I would just block off, and Tom would hear the information, and then he'd have to pass the information on to me afterwards because I just completely closed down on it. You know, very closely after that, there becomes a denial. They've got it wrong. He is going to be okay. He's only a baby. All's going to be fine. Jesus is going to heal him. And so you sort of head down that path for a little bit. And then you suddenly realise, hey, I know Jesus can heal, but what's happening here? Everybody's prayed for him. Actually, God actually healed his heart condition, which was an absolute miracle. on its own, but not the rest of him. And so then from there, you just go into a grief. It's just trying to comprehend where you're going, trying to realise your situation and what is happening. By that point, you're going, well, the question is, why, God? I'm serving you. You know, I love you. I've worked for you my entire life. Why? Why?
Nikki?
So we had a slightly different journey to Denise. So Josh was born and we didn't realise there was anything underlying going on. But we had a very, very difficult first year with him. He struggled a lot. He had silent reflux, so he was in pain a lot in his chest. It's where the valve at the top of your stomach doesn't work, so he was constantly kind of suffering with that. He was crying a lot at the time that he was awake for. Didn't sleep ever, it felt like at times. So very sleep deprived. The whole sort of first year was awful. And as he started to come out of that, we noticed obviously that he wasn't meeting the milestones he should be. And we kind of put that down to the fact that he'd had these issues, so he hadn't been able to develop normally. And he got to about 18 months old. He still wasn't walking, wasn't talking as well as he should be at that age. So his paediatrician decided to send him for some tests. He had some blood tests, and the paediatrician called when the blood tests came back and said, oh, they're all normal. We're just waiting for some genetic tests to come back. We don't think there's anything to worry about here. Anyway, 2 weeks later, I had one of those phone calls, and it's one of those defining moments in life, and I'm sure we've all got them, that it's just, I'll never, ever forget it. And just normal day, picked up the phone, and the paediatrician said, oh, your son's genetic tests have come back, and he's got a condition called Williams syndrome. And I was like, well, what does that mean? I'd never heard of it before. And in one breath, the paediatrician said, yeah, he's got Williams syndrome. It means he's going to have learning difficulties. He's likely to need special schooling, and he's going to need help throughout his adult life. In 10 seconds, my world was just completely turned upside down. I couldn't really take in the rest of that phone call. My mind was just whirling. I couldn't understand anything. Like Denise said, I was kind of in denial. You've got it wrong. You've got the tests muddled up at the hospital. This is somebody else's son. This isn't my son. Anyway, the paediatrician obviously hadn't realised it was going to be such a shock, and he actually came to our house, which was amazing really at the time, and sat down with us. And again, that meeting is a complete blur. But I do remember at the end of the meeting, I was holding Joshua in my arms, and the paediatrician stood up to go, and he said, don't forget, it's still Joshua, it's still your son. And I said, yes, but his future has just changed. And that was what I couldn't get my head around. But before I did anything else then, I just prayed, and I prayed, and I prayed, and I couldn't understand what was going on. But I did receive that peace, that supernatural peace from God. You don't get that peace when times are good and things are going well. You only get that peace in those darkest times when you really, really need it. And I really honestly felt that, and I just knew everything was going to be okay. And it wasn't always easy. But for Josh, I hung on to Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. Okay, my son's received this diagnosis, but he still has a hope, he still has a future, God still has plans for his life. It's funny actually, we sung Anchor today, which I didn't know we were going to sing, but that was released the year that Josh got a diagnosis, and I hung on to that song, that God is my anchor and he's my hope. I used to sing that a lot that year, and that really helped me get me through. And Carl doesn't mind me sharing. Obviously, Elliot's diagnosis was a long time ago before we knew each other, and he wasn't a Christian at the time, and he struggled a lot more than I did. He didn't have that anchor and that hope. He wasn't able to make sense of anything, and he was in denial for a while too, thinking developmental delay, well, he'll catch up. But God really met me in those places, and I was able to cope. It wasn't always easy. Any parent can appreciate there's massive mental adjustments to make when you're given a diagnosis like that. In the early days, which I'm ashamed of now, but I used to say, if I'd have known back then in the womb, maybe if his genes could be put back then, well, then yes, obviously. I don't want to change him now, but if I could have done. But actually, as he grew, as I got to know the little boy that I'd given birth to, that changed. If I could go back now, I'd choose him again, every single time. He's wonderful, and Carl would say the same about Elliot. They're both wonderful, and they've both made us who we are.
Well, thank you both for sharing so openly and frankly this morning. Sorry, I'm just a bit choked up there, which doesn't happen to me very often. But, So this series has been all about how Jesus sees those that others would overlook. I think one of the things that's notable is perhaps there aren't so many accounts of Jesus meeting people with the kind of disabilities that you've talked about this morning. But Nikki, I think you have some hints, or certainly not times when Jesus heals those with these kind of disabilities. I know you have some thoughts on that, Nikki.
Yeah, I think there's a really sort of important distinction here. So Jesus heals physical disabilities and he heals mental illnesses. And if you didn't hear Phil last week, his message on the demon-possessed man was amazing. And I'd really recommend you go back and listen to it. So that was about a man, we don't know, but we think he possibly had schizophrenia and other mental illnesses. And Jesus healed those things. But yeah, the distinction is really important. There's no accounts of Jesus healing people with mental disabilities. In those days, in fact, before academic tests and all the high bars we set for our children these days, most of the mild mental disabilities wouldn't have even been recognised. And if it was a thing in Jesus' day, healing, very much in inverted commas, someone from those mental disabilities, that's an intrinsic part of who they are. You can't heal them, and Jesus wouldn't want to change that either. I've got several friends with autistic children, and even those who are very high functioning, they struggle to fit into society's boxes. But the only reason they're actually disabled in society today, if you think about it, is because society disables them. We're just not set up for people like that. The education system is all about academic tests from a very early age. And I've got a friend who's convinced her child was only diagnosed because he wasn't good at tests. He's good at so many other things. He's got so many things to bring to society. But our current education system doesn't bring those out properly. And on the flip side, other neurodiverse children who achieve really well academically, they often don't understand who they are. They struggle with societal norms. They're the people that do end up with mental illnesses because society doesn't accept them for who they are. We need a better education system. We need an overhaul of society in some ways so that we see these people. We see who they are. We include them. And we don't miss all the positive things that these people can bring to society. So neurodiversity isn't a disability. It's just a brain that works in a different way. It's part of who they are. They don't need healing from it. And it's the same with my sons. Josh and Elliot, they don't need healing. Putting their missing genes back would change who they are. You can heal someone's legs if they can't walk, and you can heal a mental illness. And neither of those things change who that person is. But it just takes something away that's gone wrong with them physically or mentally. But there's nothing gone wrong with Elliot and Joshua. That's who they are. You wouldn't be healing them, you'd be changing them. And Jesus wouldn't do that.
You know, I was thinking about what you're saying about a sense of individuality, Nikki, and I was reminded of Jesus' interaction with children that's recorded in a few places, but one of the places is in Mark chapter 10. And it says that people were bringing little children to Jesus for him to place his hands on them, but the disciples rebuked them. When Jesus saw this, he was indignant. He said to them, "Let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. Truly, I tell you, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it." And he took the children in his arms, placed his hands on them, and blessed them. And I think there's some similarities here in that the disciples are trying to stop the children coming to Jesus because they don't think that the kids are actually worthy of his time. They don't think that Jesus should be kind of bothering himself with these children. But what I love is that not only does Jesus see the children, not only does Jesus embrace them, he actually commends their outlook on life. You know, the disciples kind of thought they had it all together, right? They were the ones who'd been hanging out with Jesus. They thought they knew how things worked. And Jesus is saying, no, not only do I embrace these children, but I love the way that they see the world. And it makes me think about what you're saying, Nikki, about that same thing, really, about how a different way of seeing the world. And I know that that's very much the case in something like autism, which is very much something that I see a lot of in my professional experience. But I know that that resonates with your experience of your children as well.
Yeah, so whilst it's been a struggle at times, there are so many positive things about being a mother to Elliot and Josh. If Carl and I got £1 for every time Elliot told us he loved us, we'd make about £30 or £40 a day. If his siblings got £1 every time he kissed them on their head just as they walked past him, they'd be very rich too. And Joshua just says the most amazing things to me really regularly, like, "Mummy, smile. There it is. You're so beautiful." And Mummy, sometimes I think my heart will burst with the love it has for you. And I don't know if you remember that on Mother's Day, and the kids' team put those amazing videos together. And the last question was, what's the best memory you have of your mum? And he paused and he just said, "She's just been great my whole entire life." And it really made me cry at the time. I'm so blessed, and not many mums get that from their 11-year-olds. And his hugs are amazing. He calls them his koala hugs, and he wraps himself around you. And if you don't like hugs, Phil, then you've never had a hug from Josh. Just this morning, actually, he noticed I wasn't myself because I was quite nervous about coming and sitting up here this morning. And just in the kitchen this morning, he said, "Mum, are you all right?" And I said, "Oh, I'm a little bit nervous because I've got to talk in church this morning." And he said, "Oh, do you want a hug?" And and his hug made me feel much better. So while they do both have their challenges, they're far outweighed. And I'm pleased to say the worst of the challenges for Josh and Elliot are behind us. And there's so much we can learn from them. Elliot and Josh both accept everyone for who they are. They don't care about skin colour. They don't care about age. The rest of us, we often naturally gravitate to people who are like us, but they don't care about any of that. Josh has made me so much more confident. When he was younger, I remember Evie would have been in reception at the time. He'd have been 3 and not walking properly yet. And I used to go to the playground after school, and he would crawl around and just crawl up to benches and pull himself up on a stranger's knees and just start talking to them. So I'd have to go and introduce myself and explain why he was like he was. And I got very good at talking to strangers. And now I lead new people team in church. So I don't think I'd do that so well if it wasn't for Josh. And as for me and my husband, well, the first conversation I ever had with my husband was after filming a story of how I coped with Joshua's diagnosis for a church event that we had quite a few years ago now. And Carl had only just started coming along to church at the time. And he saw that video and came up to me afterwards and just told him how it had touched him and how he could relate. And the rest, as they say, is history. And some of us, we forget to draw on God's strength as we go about our daily lives, thinking that we can do things in our own strength. But often those with special needs recognise that they need God's strength more than the rest of us maybe. They can be better at understanding that they need God in their lives. And Philippians 4:13 says, "I can do all things through him who gives me strength." And because those with special needs often have more to overcome, they're much more readily drawing on God in their daily lives. And Josh recently has suffered with some fairly extreme anxiety, so he started a new school. He transferred from mainstream last summer and started at a special school in September. And he's always been pretty sheltered, but he's witnessed some quite severe behavioural problems at his special school. He's had to have a crash course in swear words, and he sees people like being angry really regularly. And his anxiety really got bad. He was being physically sick at school because he was so anxious, which obviously was heartbreaking for us at the time. But we were really able to help him to understand how God can help him in that situation. So we use Philippians 4:6-7, which is, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything through prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God that transcends all understanding will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus." And I prayed that over him. And he's used that verse too. And in fact, just earlier this week, there was a couple of bad episodes, and he was really anxious going in on Thursday morning, and I prayed over him. And I just prayed that he would feel God's peace as he went into school. And he said to me, "Mummy, can you pray that prayer over me every morning?" He could really feel the benefit. And I've emailed his teachers and said, "Look, we're Christians, and Josh is using prayer to help him overcome these issues at school. So can you support him in that?" And they've been very good and said, "Yes, if that helps, we'll support him." So he's already witnessing to teachers and friends at school, which is just amazing. So Williams syndrome does not define him. He's defined as an overcomer in this situation. He's defined by God.
So powerful, isn't it? And another aspect that came through strongly as we were kind of preparing for this is how important it is that we help the parents when they're of children when they're going through these challenges. And I was reminded of another ICU moment when Jesus sees the crowd coming to him in Matthew 11, and he says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your soul. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And I just love what I love. I mean, this verse kind of applies to anyone, doesn't it? I guess, if you've walked in without anything that's on your mind, without ever having any burdens in life, then you're probably doing quite well to have got to this point. But actually, we all have the burdens that we carry. We all have those things that stress us out and that make us to feel weary. I love how Jesus promises rest here. That he promises rest for our inner world as well, not just what's going on externally. And how he will kind of promise us to lighten the load that we carry in life. But Denise, I know that you want to speak to those parents who've experienced the kind of challenges that we're talking about today.
Yes, I think, over the years as we have walked through, with our experiences, and not only with Joel, but generally in life experiences, we have really realised the world is not a perfect place. There's very few things that go to plan. And again, we're talking here in context too, as to disabilities. Not only within our children, but, we see a lot of adults. Obviously, our children are going to grow. And we have a lot of people that are disabled that we're coming into contact with on a daily basis. I think the first thing I wanted to say, though, was to mums, because I know whenever anything goes wrong in a pregnancy, whether it's a miscarriage, where situations are happening outside of your control, the first thing a mother does is blame herself. You go, oh dear, could I have done something better? Should I have done something else? Can I say, hey, mums, you are great. Our mums are brilliant. You do whatever is in your control to do. And sometimes things are just a little bit out of our control. So don't blame yourselves. Don't be so harsh on yourselves. Understand, hey, life is happening around you at this particular time, and you may be walking through some more severe situations, some not less severe, but they're still impacting upon your life. Hey, it's okay. We do the best we can, and we actually walk through it. What we're actually needing to do is to learn how to manage our situation, understand what the needs are for our children within this, and then we can get a plan together and then start working through them.
Thank you, Denise. And Nikki, I know you can speak to the impact that you've seen over time.
So it can be really tough having a child with disability, and that often does lead to misunderstanding. I've got a friend with an autistic son, and she told me that when she got the autism diagnosis, one of her well-meaning Christian friends told my friend that she should pray for him to counter the diagnosis.
Yeah.
What, and change who he is? Needless to say, she didn't pray that prayer. Like me, she loves the son she has. She has no wish to change him. It just shows we need to educate people, even well-meaning Christians. And I also just want to say here that Carl and I are really blessed. Yes, Elliot and Josh both come with worries and challenges, and in the early days, life was really tough with both of them. But now I would say day to day, they cause us the least emotional stress, which definitely comes from the three of our children who have the full complement of genes. So I do want to give a shout out to all those parents for whom it is really tough. A lot of people do have it a lot tougher than we do, and I do recognise that. There's a huge range of conditions and many ways in which neurodiversity presents itself. But don't they all make the rest of us better people?
Yeah.
So Carl and I recently watched an amazing comedy drama called As We See It. I don't know if any of you have seen it. It's on Prime. I'd highly recommend it. It is adult viewing. But it's about three autistic people and how they see life and their carer and their interactions. It's very, very well done, very funny. But one more poignant moment at the end. There was one of the characters in it had very challenging behaviour as a child, and his father was talking to someone else who had a sister with autism. And the brother of this lady said, "So does this get any easier?" And the dad pauses and says, "As a kid, Jack used to throw epic tantrums. He'd scream and yell and get in fights with other kids. He'd bite them. He'd bite me. I remember taking him to a playground and looking around and wishing that I had any other kid in the world instead of him. And then I started to realise he was making me better. I became a little more considerate, more compassionate, and I liked the guy I became. So does it get any easier? No, not really. It's a hell of a burden, but it's also a gift." And Carl doesn't mind me saying that it made him cry. Having fathered a child with special needs for almost 24 years now is a real light bulb moment for him. Elliot has made him a better person, a more compassionate person, a person who's far more accepting of those who are different to him. And just to be clear, unlike that character, neither of us have ever wished to swap our sons.
Thank you, Nikki. Following on from that, I guess it's helpful for us to think about how we as a community can help and support parents. Denise, I know that you took some intentional steps to deal with some of the challenges that you faced at that time, especially around loneliness.
Yes, 37 years ago, our son was born, and back then, you actually didn't see a lot of people in society with disabilities. They were all kept behind closed doors. Nobody really knew or understood. The Christian response to it was, yeah, you're not praying enough. You've got sin in your life. What did you do wrong to deserve this? Which wasn't actually very helpful at all. And so, of course, what can actually end up happening is just living in a very isolated situation. It can feel very lonely, and you're having to sort of like try and work through some of these things, actually, with more people around you that are negative than are positive. And I just found, for me, being in the house was not actually helpful. It brought me to a point where I probably wasn't coping all that well. I didn't quite know how to do it. I needed people in my life. So my mechanism was basically, okay, let's pack Joel up, pack his bag and everything else, and off to the shops we go. So I broke all conventions then, I still do now. But so off I headed to the shops, and you've got to understand Joel. Joel's a very unique little character. Screamed and cried a lot. There were a lot of difficulties no matter where I went or what I did. It was loud. And everything we did and everywhere we went was very, very loud. And Joel was being fed by a tube directly into his stomach. And so, of course, I arrived at the shop, and our shopping centres in Australia had big couch areas in front of the big department stores, which was very comfortable and great. So what I would do is nobody'd be sitting there. I'd go and sit myself down on the couch and then merrily pull everything out of the bag and fix his tube, which you can imagine. I mean, we're talking a big tube here, and I've had a huge syringe on top of it, and I've got to pour from a bottle into this syringe. Okay, so you're holding one end, you're trying to pour the other. Joel also worked out if he didn't want me to feed him, what he would do is he would contract his stomach muscles, which then meant everything came out of the tube and everywhere. And so it was a balancing act. I would have to be really, really have my finger on the pulse, know what was going on, and just as he would start to contract, I would lock off the tubes so it wouldn't all come out. Wait for him to relax again, and then we would continue. So it was fun and games. So here I am doing this in a very public setting. So of course, number one comes over and looks at me, sits down. The second person comes in and sits down, and they're watching. By the time I finish feeding Joel, I have a crowd of people, and they're all asking questions because nobody has seen anything like this. What is going on? So I'm now answering these questions, and I'm talking to people. But you know, what it did for me was it put me into a public setting. It gave me people to talk to. I talked about a lot of the comic aspects as well, because trust me, there are a lot of comical stories as well. But just being in there, and if I can say anything, be open, be in these situations, work out what you need to do for your ability to be able to function and to cope well within your situation.
But I know, Denise, you said before as well about being careful not to become isolated.
Yes. The difficulty is that we can become very, very isolated within this. Now, we all need to find out how we can function within these situations. And for each family, it's going to be different. You're going to have your ways of dealing and doing with it. You're going to, you may have a very good family backup system around you. You might be doing okay with that. But whatever it is and however you cope, can I say, don't isolate yourself. You need people. We've got great people around. I love it that we have much better support systems these days. There's a much better understanding of what is happening, in the likes of where we are with disabilities. So if I can encourage you, seek those out if you need them. Talk to people who can you just need to talk to. Sometimes you just need to talk. It's not sympathy. It's just talking through and just knowing that you've got people there that can support you.
I love how proactive you were, Denise. I love how you challenged the kind of, the prevailing culture. And I love that you actually helped to educate people in that process as well. I think that's so powerful. I love that you didn't let the prevailing attitude define what you did, but you tackle things head on, as we might expect now as well. But it's interesting you mentioned about sympathy. And Nikki, I know you have some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, so sympathy at the time of the diagnosis, when you're going through anything like that, then that's fine. I needed that, and I got that in droves, actually, from some amazing supportive friends. Shout out to Rose and Carla, who are both here today, who are both amazing and have really got me through some tough times in my life. But once you're fully adjusted to having disabled children and you recognise all the positives, we don't necessarily want your sympathy. I'm not easily offended, but when I tell someone that my son's got special needs or a genetic deletion, don't tell me you're sorry. I'm not. My sons are wonderful just as they are. Thank you very much. Instead, the best response is to see us. Ask us about our children. If you know any parent, we love to talk about our children. And those of us with disabled children aren't any different.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, oh, I'm sorry, ask about them. Ask me what conditions they have, how it presents itself, what life is like with a disabled child, what life is like for them. I'm so happy to talk about them. Let me tell you how amazing it is to have children like that. Yes, we have our challenges with them both, but I choose not to focus on that.
What do you think that looks like for us practically, Nikki?
So first of all, I just want to say thank you to everyone here, really. We love our church, and you all already do this so well. You're all amazing with our sons. There's nowhere else in society that we could let them just wander around a building this size, not really knowing exactly where they are, and not being bothered about that fact. We know they're safe, they're accepted, they're loved, and it really doesn't go unnoticed to us as parents. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you to any of you who've shared kind words with us, shared kind words with them, interacted with them. We've had a number of people telling us about Elliot's singing and how they love to hear him make a joyful noise to the Lord. We don't think he's quite ready for worship team yet, though. So thank you. And as a result, they both really love it here. And every Sunday, Josh checks himself into place. He did it this morning, actually, and he came right in here and gave me his card up on Swallows practicing on stage this morning. And I have to make sure the leaders have seen the card and know that he's checked in, because he's just so keen to get in there. So shout out to the kids team as well. You do an amazing job, and we've got quite a number of children with special needs that call this church home. So I just think that's a real testament to what the kids team do as well. So thank you so much. You're amazing. Remember the new commandment that that Jesus gave us: love one another, even as I have loved you, that you also love one another. And that's John 13:34. It doesn't say only do that if the person you're loving is neurotypical. See them. We're not ashamed of our children, far from it. Engage with us. And can I reiterate that once you're fully adjusted to the diagnosis, you can't go wrong with taking an interest. Use us to educate yourselves. Accept people for who they are. Don't focus on what society might perceive is wrong with a person. Embrace the totality of who each person is. Colossians 3:1 says, since then you have been raised with Christ, set your hearts on things above. All Christians, neurotypical Christians and neurodiverse Christians, should strive to set their hearts on things above. And as Christians, we have a duty to help all others find Christ. We shouldn't be differentiating. Elliot and Josh should set their hearts on things above. Not in spite of the fact they have learning difficulties or because of the fact they have learning difficulties, but because they are Christians and they want to become more like Christ. And finally, Colossians 3:11. Here there's no Gentile or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all. If we're accepting of every race, every state of living, the Bible is telling us we should likewise be accepting of every neurological difference. Nobody should be defined by a label. Everyone diagnosed with a mental disability is so much more than that diagnosis, but so many fail to see past that label. It's time to reach out to this marginalised community, both the individuals and their families. Stop trying to squeeze them into boxes. See past the label, accept them and love them for who they are and for what they can teach us.
So good, Nikki. We kind of need to draw things to a conclusion, but Denise, what impact do you think there might be for our world if we were known as a church about how well we support people?
Oh, do you know, I think already we have actually impacted our community. I think we are being seen as a church where people can come in, are not only welcomed, but where we actually are able to look at people individually, where we can actually see disabilities in children. And our team, honestly, our kids team are absolutely phenomenal in how they have looked after certain children and worked with our kids. But can I say too, as a church, can we, not only are we wanting to see the children as Jesus saw the children, but let's see the families. Let's look at the families, understand families. Yep, they're arriving here and they have a brave face on as well. And they're doing exceptionally well. But it's not all that simple at home. There is a lot of underlying situations at home. So let's be a church that remember to respond kindly, lovingly to the families. Let's see those families really be impacted by the way we work and the way we love.
Great.
I think it's been so powerful. We appreciate you both so very much, and we so appreciate your children as well. We so appreciate you sharing what you've shared with us today. The thing that really strikes me as we kind of draw to a conclusion is how powerful, yes, that we're a church that is ready and prepared, that sees people, that welcomes people, but also that we actually carry that attitude out into our world. Because much of the stigma that you saw 37 years ago and that you've spoken about in your experience, Nikki, is still out there. And actually how powerful if we can be the voices that help to counter that stigma, that help to see the best in people, and that help to actually see people differently to the way that the rest of the world sees